right. Good evening and welcome. This is the very first episode of Live from the Band Room, brought to you by the Maryland Marching Band Association. This is the first of hopefully many episodes that we're going to be doing live on Wednesday nights. And we're going to be talking with people from all across the marching arts as well as the music industry and just learning from them and finding out lots of cool info. And so our first guest here tonight is Mr. Doug Thrower of the Bluecoats. Welcome, Doug.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Sure. So Doug is a DCI Hall of Fame member and has been the arranger at the Bluecoats since 1999?
97.
97. All right.
Yeah.
And so lots of awesome programs, and we're going to talk about a couple things, some of that more recent work as we get into things. But since this is going out to our high school band students who are kind of stranded without a normal band season, I wanted to start off and ask you, Doug, what your experience was like in high school bands, or beginning an instrument even up through high school.
Well, I was really fortunate because I grew up in I always refer to it as a hockey town because that's all anybody ever did. It's a small town about an hour and a half northeast of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, called Peterborough. And you wouldn't think there was a lot of music going on in this little town, but my music teacher had actually done his postgraduate work down at North Texas. So he was phenomenal. And we actually read music almost every day in the band, and it was a program that he had set up so that the class you were in was actually also the band. So it wasn't, you'd go to your 9 o'clock or your ninth grade band class and do one thing, and then after school you'd go to band. If you were in that ninth grade class, that was the band. So we rehearsed every day. So we actually got to, especially for the town, like a pretty proficient band, and certainly band that could read and sight read music. We read all the time. So I was really lucky, to have, just found myself in that situation. And of course, back then it didn't matter where you wanted to go. It was whatever district you were in, you had to go to that school. So my high school experience was great in terms of music. I started my drum corps experience when I was 11.
Wow.
So, in a little group called the Crescendos, small but mighty, and we probably should have been called the Tassets because we weren't very good. But we believed in ourselves, and it was, for me that was like more of a club than anything. It was just a great thing to belong to, and another reason to play a few times a week. And that my early drum corps days, I think back to how we rehearsed and what we rehearsed. And I was literally one of these guys. I had a piston and a rotor, and being 11, I spent an entire day trying to figure out how to play a low D, because we didn't have that third valve yet, right? Well, you just didn't play it. We didn't have those notes back then, but that was, I'm sorry, I just realized you could probably hear that bird, right?
A little bit.
Sorry about that. That keeps me company when I'm writing.
Oh.
So that was my early drum corps experience, and I was there until the group folded, like most of the Ontario corps did, around, I want to say 1979, 1980. So, and I went from there. Another group started in my hometown called the Canadian Knights, and I was already in college. I was going to Humber College, which is where a lot of trumpet players in Canada went at that time because of the professor that was teaching there. There was no jazz degree in Canada at that time, so anybody that wanted to be anything other than orchestral went to Humber College, or Grant MacEwan out west, or St. FX out east. So, and I was 18, and a buddy of mine asked me if I'd be interested in teaching a small corps in Peterborough called the Canadian Knights. again, we're talking about maybe 30 brass and 14, 15-year-olds, not no players. But that was a great experience because that was my first writing job. And they rehearsed twice a week. So my pal and I would drive from Toronto to Peterborough, about an hour and a half, and hand out maybe 16 bars of music, every week to these little kids. And most of it was really bad. So I would take it back, and I'd have 3 days to fix it, to figure out what I'd done wrong or what wasn't working. And that was a great learning experience for me, and kind of the foundation of my writing. Really was just trial and error in a lot of ways. From that group, again, folded, and I moved on to the Dutch Boy. I don't know if you remember them. So they were kind of a popular, 13 to 16 place drum corps in the 90s and the late 80s. And I didn't do any writing for them other than rewriting, which happens on the road all the time. And I spent 4 years there, and then I had decided I was done with drum corps, actually, after a particularly bad summer. And I was living in Montreal because I was going to McGill at the time, McGill University. And Ted Swallow from the Bluecoats called me in '92 and asked if I would be interested in coming and teaching the brass line. He had heard about me through literally a roadie from the Bluecoats, like somebody that loaded trucks or volunteered and that knew I was going to leave the Dutch Boy. And he called me and said, would I come down and teach the brass line? And I said no, but I'd be happy to come down for a weekend and have a look, because I wasn't about to say, after my previous summer experience, I wasn't about to say, yeah, I'll do it. Back then, like the drum corps thing was just say, hey man, are you coming on board? We'll pay you $75 a month. Here's your jacket.
Wow.
There was no contracts or anything like that. It was like all like word of, a handshake. And but I did go down, and from the moment I got there, I realized, okay, the way I've experienced drum corps is not the way it should be experienced. This place is inclusive, and they care about their students, and they're taking care of business. They travel safely, they eat. That's good. Yeah. It was just that first weekend I knew I'd found my home, I guess. And this would have been my 30th summer with the drum corps. Yeah. So, or my 29th, I'm sorry.
Okay.
My 30th is, they haven't fired me yet because they want to do it in person.
That's great. I wonder how many 20 and 30 year careers in drum corps started with, I'll come for a weekend and see what it's about. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's awesome that you can experience the culture and the community present at a place in a short amount of time, and it just changes your outlook.
Yeah. It's, I remember that first weekend so vividly, just because, well, the guy who, essentially the benefactor of the Bluecoats is Ted Swallow. He saved them from themselves on 2 separate occasions and brought them back from ruin. And the nicest man, and he picked me up at the airport. That was like a check. Okay, we're putting that in the, pick me up at the airport. That's good.
Didn't have to hitchhike.
That hasn't happened before. So that was a bonus. And then he took me to his place. We had a nice dinner and talked, and he showed me he had just designed and produced a cook truck, which I had not really seen before, and he was so proud of it, and the new equipment truck, and he kind of took me a tour around the corps, and right away I thought, this guy's priorities are so in line, because all he talked about was, the kids will come here, and I'll get this, and kids, just kept talking about the students. made a huge impression on me that first weekend. And it was the kind of place where uh, the people that were in it didn't really understand what a real problem was. That's how insulated the students
Right.
were at the time. Because the year before, the group I was with, I love your story. We got to our first show, and the director pulled them all together and told them we don't have shoes. They had forgotten to order the shoes, so they had no shoes. So there's people on the phone calling kids. Wait, can you bring your shoes from last year? Or kids putting socks over their shoes and everything. So at my first Bluecoats weekend, we were out after a rehearsal at a place called Mulligan's that had great wings and everything. And I don't know anybody, so I'm just kind of getting the feel of the land here. And over at the percussion table, we have a major dilemma. Are we going to go out with 4 quads or 5?
Of course, major dilemma.
That was their idea of a problem, So
Right.
they're having this fight, and I put my hands up. And I said, I have one question. Are we going to have shoes at the first show? And they're like, well, yeah, of course we're going to. I said, okay, I'm in. I'm on board.
That's awesome.
So I've been a Bluecoat ever since.
Wow. That's great. Yeah, and what a great time to get to experience everything that the Bluecoats have done in the last few decades. How would you say the core has evolved stylistically in the time that you've been there?
Obviously, all the chords have gotten more proficient. I mean, you saw in the 80s, obviously, the shift from a musical focus to more of a global focus, a lot more emphasis on visual. Starting with the Cadets, of course, in the early 80s, phenomenal. And then kind of evolving, obviously, Cavaliers in the early 2000s, where visual was actually, on par with the musical in terms of weight and effectiveness and just part of the programming and the pacing. So, I mean, even back in the early Bluecoats days, you could write a horn chart and you could go to, a fair or something and play that horn chart and it would stand on its own. You wouldn't need drums or a front ensemble to necessarily, think back to the early, think back to the Blue Devils early 90s, One More Time, Chuck Corea. You could take that horn line and go stand them somewhere in front of a shopping mall and play that tune, and it would be completely effective and full and enough,
Yeah, sure.
Whereas now, if you took, a movement from the Blue Devils, there would be a large gap where maybe the front ensemble is taken over, or a gap where the percussion is a lead voice, not subordinate, but a lead voice. And there would be a visual effect happening with the brass during that time. So I think, I'm not sure evolve is the right word. It's changed. I mean, I'm not suggesting it's worse or better. I mean, certainly the proficiency has come a long way since I first started in this activity.
Sure.
But it's just it's more kind of a total package now in terms of look what's happened with the front ensembles, and like since the early Cavaliers, the 2000s. My goodness, the keyboard players that are coming out of high schools now, and what they can do, and those little front, we call them a front ensemble in my group. They can carry a moment these days, because they're so proficient, so musical. And the variety that they have, especially now with the inclusion of electronics, that's really, in terms of the music, that's the biggest change since when I began, with the evolution of the front ensemble. And obviously the inclusion of electronics, for better or worse. I mean, there's a lot of not so great things happening with electronics out there. But there's also a lot of good things happening too, And part of this, of course, is the arena that we've been put in, where we perform our final performances.
Yeah.
There's this, huge building where the air conditioning can literally cancel your whole low brass section. If you go in there during the day and you have no amplification on, just the sound of the building alone, forget about the audience, but what it takes to keep the building cool, or the air circulating, that noise, which you probably wouldn't even notice, is enough to take out a lot of the upper low frequencies kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, bird. Sorry about that. This is a new thing, man. I just moved him in here. That's changed. That's changed everything since we moved into that building. We've all had to figure out how are we going to, if we're going to charge $90 for somebody to sit in one of those seats, we better put on a really, really good show that can fill this place.
Sure.
And you go into a building like that, you're not competing against the Blue Devils. You're competing against Fleetwood Mac and tractor pulls and motocross. Big events. That have their own amplification system and their.
Sure.
So we had to figure out, how are we going to get our message to the audience, within DCI's rules and everything, and still try to maintain, what makes drum corps special.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
Yeah.
So I wanted to dig in and ask you a little more about arranging. I know certainly I've gotten to see some great efforts from young people that want to get into arranging. And so how did I know you mentioned trial and error with the early drum corps. What are other ways that you went about learning to arrange when you were newer to it?
Well, as I said, I was fortunate because my first real job, I was in a position where I could hand something out and hear it, and then take it back. And the students didn't know any different, so I wasn't worried about making mistakes. I would just write. And I had a pretty good foundation in terms of, the math, like theory. I knew my safe low limits. I knew what I couldn't do with the instruments. People that write novels say, a writer writes. You have to write. That's how you get good at writing. Is especially kids that are in university setting or even high school, you have so much information around you. When I went to McGill, if I was doing, a drum part for a class assignment, I would go to a drummer and say, how would you prefer to see this? Like if you were reading this, what would you want to see? What would give you the best, kind of chance at sight reading this well? Or, being a brass player, my knowledge of the woodwinds was limited. So I would go to a sax player and say, can you do this? And I'd show them. And I think that's a big part of it, especially if you're in a university setting. You can't beat that because you have everything you need right there. And I'm not talking about teachers. I mean, amongst the students, you can find out so much, just by, sharing your work and showing them, I remember reading stuff at McGill. We'd have to do these little sextets or whatever, like jazz things. And you'd get like a chart from a piano player, and the trumpet part would be like, boom. For him, that's going like, gong on the piano, right? You go, no, that's not, it's a great idea, but that's really hard. So, you got to, that was a great experience too, is just telling people, well, that doesn't necessarily work on a trumpet. It works great on a piano, but, you have to give a guy more time. Not to say it's impossible, but I think that's the thing is just, if you're in a situation where you can write, just write as much as you can, and hopefully you get your stuff played, I was, like I said, I was really lucky because I had that rehearsal group. If you can find a group that's a rehearsal group, or, a concert band that you're in that will read your stuff, that always helps, I'll go back to the math 9 times out of 10, I go back to, if you know your theory and the math and your safe low limits and obviously the ranges of the instruments and what's comfortable, depending on who you're writing for, obviously, um, you can't fail with that stuff. It doesn't make your work interesting necessarily, but it'll make it playable, which is a really, really, really good start. After that, like knowing all that, the rule. I hate to use the word rules because it sounds so limiting, but finding your own voice is a different thing. That's about just writing and writing and writing, and you tend to gravitate towards things sometimes to a fault, that work for you or work in certain situations. And if you're lucky, some people will like them. those things. I after you get past all the math part, I think it's just about being honest and writing, which believe me, in the pageantry field is tough to do sometimes, very tough to do because you're being adjudicated, But separating that, I think just being honest and writing what you really truly believe in, or you want to hear, or you want people to hear, I think is also huge, right up there with the math. But the math comes first. You gotta do your homework, man.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think one of the perils of learning to arrange now is the same thing that makes it so easy to arrange, which is the technology. You can just plug it in and hit play. To me is also kind of a peril of it because you don't get to know the instruments really, and what you're hearing back is not accurate and is not necessarily true to what's possible on an instrument or what sounds good on an instrument. It's just what the computer will spit back at you. When you punch something in.
I don't know how I feel about that. Like, I think obviously there's some guys, listen to John Mackey's stuff. I think some of his stuff is just fantastic, but I think he's the exception to the rule, where you do have a lot of guys that really haven't played, an instrument, except for the keyboard or the piano, and don't really know the limitations of the instruments, and they're relying on a computer. If it goes red, you can't play that, which is normally wrong anyway. I don't know how I feel about that, because I think, obviously there's been a lot of good music written, by people like that. But I think, there's something about just the theory and the knowledge of those other instruments. And I have to admit, mine is limited, like, especially when it comes to woodwind instruments, but, there are great resources out there. Beyond, your computer, Sibelius or Finale, where the note goes red and you shouldn't play that note. Don Sebesky's book, The Complete Arranger, phenomenal. Comes with CDs where you actually hear, here's clarinets up high. Here's why maybe you don't always do that. Or just little things. Again, if you have the resources, if you're in the school, you can find out so much about the other instruments just by hanging out with guys, and asking questions, and don't be afraid to sound dumb, because we all have our own experience. I can write great stuff for the trumpet with tremendous confidence, but I don't have the same confidence even with trombones, to this day. When we added trombones with the Bluecoats, I brought in a specialist. Bob Higgins came in because I was like, like, I've written for trombones because I was a jazz major, so obviously, but you know what? I don't know the ins and outs of it the way you do. So will you teach me? And he got through to me on a couple points.
There's been some great stuff there in the last few years with the trombone thing.
I'm actually proud of what we did with the trombones for the activity, because I kind of feel like and I don't mean disrespect to anybody, but up until then it was, kind of sit cross-legged on a pillow and play goose eggs. And it was like, oh, we're missing the point of the instrument in a way. It's such a great, it's a great jazz instrument, that's for sure. I mean, and we couldn't have done it without Bob Higgins at the Bluecoats, because he was a huge part of that. He was also the guy, by the way, who created the Bluecoats bass sound, the tuba sound. He was the Pied Piper of tuba players back in the day. So yeah, so
That's
yeah,
awesome.
but I think it's like arranging is really knowing about the instruments, and also having some kind of idea, like what works for each instrument, and what am I going to do to make this interesting also, like what sound am I going to include to make this not just everybody else's tune or everybody else's arrangement. So but I'll keep going back to the math. I swear to God, that's 75% of it. Putting the instruments in the right register, and having it sit well on the instrument, and knowing when to switch colors. And
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
That's great. So I'm curious, with the Bluecoats team especially, you've got to work with such great people there. I was wondering if you could explain what the collaboration process is like on the musical arrangements, and who those people are that you get to work with, and what that relationship is like.
Well, I'm really fortunate because I work with great people. We've found ourselves in a place these last few years where it took years to get us to this point, but we've got like-minded people in the room with no resistance. It's we call it the trust circle, and I refer to it as like the improv circle, because like improvised comedy, rule number one is you don't say no when you're starting a scene, or you shut the scene down, right? So you have to roll with an idea, like whatever's pitched to you in the scene, you run with it, So that is kind of what the room is like at the Bluecoats. Like we'll have a sit down, and if somebody has an idea, like-minded people, it's not, well, here's why we can't do that or why we shouldn't. It's like everybody, the wheels start turning and we run with it. It's not always a great idea, and maybe it's not the idea that we use, but we've just gotten to the point of trust and friendship where we believe enough in the other people that, okay, this has merit because John Vanderkoff just said it, or Tom Rarick just said it, so yeah. I'm going with it, because I mean, those are my, it's like a family, like those are my best friends, not just my colleagues, but we've gotten to a place where it's like family, and I have to say, the Bluecoats have nurtured that. A lot of groups, if you come third on drums but you win, okay, well, obviously we need a new drum guy. It's like no. It's like we just don't think that way, And it's like when we've had our failures, obviously, and when we've had them, it's never turned into a like it was his fault, it was her fault. It was like, we're going down on this ship together.
Yeah, that's great. And
I have to say, like, I think that has rubbed off on the membership of the drum corps. When they see us working, like when we're there at spring training and making it happen on the ground, kind of thing. I like to think that example is being picked up by the members of the drum corps, and that's a huge point of pride of mine. It's like apart from meeting my wife and starting my family, it's like the best luck I've had really is having this group of people like kind of converge. So the process, I went off on a tangent on you. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. That's great stuff.
But the process is, it varies. Like we normally after the summer on Labor Day weekend, we will have some kind of retreat, and the drum corps actually flies us normally it's New York City, and we'll meet somewhere, and they actually they ask us to bring our wives because they want us to be happy. But more importantly, they want the wives to be happy. Because
smart. Yep.
Yeah, this job requires a lot of traveling and a lot of time away from home. So it's kind of a really lovely thing that the organization does. And we will get together Friday night, and we'll have a short meeting, like some kind of dinner meeting. And I always feel like that's when we're at our best, when we're not in a hotel room somewhere. But just people will start, imagine if, or wouldn't it be cool if, or maybe we should, those kind of conversations. And that's where the seeds are planted. And then we'll spend the whole weekend in like a meeting room, and just talk about different ideas that we all have. And sometimes we come out of that weekend with, a vision, what it could be, or at least a starting point. Sometimes, in the case of last year, we had already started the summer before discussing it kind of nonchalantly, on the staff bus, much to my terror. But normally the ideas will start Labor Day, and then we'll see, we see where they evolve after that. And it's very collaborative. People always have music to pitch. There's a lot of musicians. John Vanderkoff is not just like the artistic director and the visual designer. He's a great musician too. And he's got a huge, like everything from, the Sex Pistols to Stephen Reich, anything in between, it's all there kind of thing. And that's a huge resource for all of us, because he'll pitch stuff, that I've never heard before, which is always refreshing. Or he'll pitch something and say, "Oh man, I've been listening to that for 20 years. Why haven't we talked about this before?" kind of thing,
Yeah.
Everybody, all the guys have stuff, Jim Moore, who's in charge of the choreography and the color guard, great musical instincts. He'll listen to like an initial draft, and you can tell, like, by looking at him, okay, this is where the tune wanders. I need to tighten that up. They all have something to say about the pacing. I'm very fortunate because it's like it's actually a room full of arrangers. They all have something to do with the pacing. Of course, Tom Rarick, he's the best guy in the business by far. That guy, you talk about good luck. I mean, how I got partnered with him. I mean, he's just an incredible musician, and has a great sense of pacing, and he knows how to do the drum corps thing, which, let's face it, can be a lot of this, the muscle flexing and stuff. But he can do it in a musical. He can frame it in a way that makes musical sense to me, at least. So I'm very fortunate as far as that goes. So it's. I'll tell you, like in terms of collaborating, I used to be the guy that dug my heels in. I was like, I'd get indignant if we took out a phrase because that wasn't my vision at the time. And wouldn't what I wouldn't give to take so many of those times back. Because it would have done me a lot more good to just listen first, and then make my decision. Instead of just getting my nose out of joint. And when you're writing, you're protective of your work. We all are,
sure.
Right? But I've learned, like, especially when you're dealing with guys like I'm dealing with, let them finish, and then make your point.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're right, and sometimes you're right, but you don't get your way, and that's fine because someone has to be in charge. But most of the time, you come up with what's best for the group. If you're willing to listen and take the criticism and everything. Blackbird's a great example of that from last year.
Yeah.
It's like for me, it had to be as simple as it possibly could be, because the original is basically foot taps, guitar, and Paul's voice, and just a great set of really poignant but simple lyrics. And I thought, do we really want to take this to the pageantry place? I wanted to play that tune. That was first on my list of tunes I wanted to play, but kind of as a relief to all the drum corps around it.
Yeah.
And we had a version. We had a few versions. where it was that simple, and there was one high point, and then it kind of came down again. And this was during move-ins, so we're about 2 weeks out of, our first performance kind of thing. And John and I had a conversation. It's like, you gotta. I knew what was coming. It's like, the arena, and like, does it need to get bigger again and everything? And I was like, oh man, like, it probably does. That was my answer. It probably does for the arena. Where we are, and we could have done it differently, but I think it came off okay. The big moment was big, and if finals had been in Madison, Wisconsin, we could have gone with our first version, I think, and moved people, but because of the arena we're in and the activity we're in, we did what we needed to do to make that tune kind of, be big enough. I always compare it to Broadway makeup. Like, nobody wears mascara the way they would, if you're on stage, people in the back need to see your eyelashes, so that's how I justify it in my
no, that makes sense.
That's how I justify my bastardization of Blackbird. Yeah, you have to write for the arena you're in. And I'll tell you what, I hear pageantry, and if there's students interested in writing for marching bands, and you must hear this all the time, where you get that arrangement where it sounds like an intellectual exercise. Where it's, let's say it's Blackbird, we'll use that example again, but it's been reharmonized to the point where it can be interesting, and clever, but is it entertaining?
Right. Is it good?
or does it move people the way the original tune was intended to move people? That can happen a lot, with young arrangers. It's like, and I was guilty of that, man. Like, my first Bluecoats brass book, I look at it now and just go, oh my God, what were you thinking? Like, because I was still at school. I was at McGill and I was studying jazz, and it was so thick, and I had to include every single. If I could get a note in there, man, it's going in
right
somewhere, and a lot of it, like I said, it was more of an intellectual exercise, or instead of doing the right thing for that particular moment, in the show or in the tune. So it's one thing I would definitely caution against, is like out clevering yourself.
I'm a percussion person, and so my version of that is always like when somebody that I work with gets their chance to write a drum book for the first time, and you hear that first drum book that's chock full of every possible lick that they've ever wanted to put into a drum book. And it's just lick after lick. And then you wait and you see like the fifth thing that they write for a group, when they sort of get that out of their system, and then they start looking at, okay, what's right for this piece? What does it really need, as opposed to just what stuff do I want to cram into this piece?
Well, every guy I worked with before Tom Rarick was that guy.
There's a lot of them, us, whatever, however you want to.
Yeah, and it's natural, right? Because especially when you get started, you kind of you're testing the waters, and you're kind of doing it for yourself more than thinking about who's going to be listening to it. Right. That's what I mean by intellectual exercise. It's like and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how we learn, our boundaries. Damn it, bird. I'm sorry. I forgot about this bird. Right. And that's where, you find your boundaries, you learn to leave space, and that's a big thing. And that's not something, let's face it, that drum corps necessarily rewards. It's space, which is a problem. And it's part of the reason we all sound the same, is because we're adjudicated, and we've all got these ideas about what's going to succeed competitively, and they all happen to be busy, notey, virtuosic things, because, and I get that. I'm not fond. I'm trying to figure out how to explain this without being critical of that, because let's face it, if you're watching golf on TV, you're not turning the TV on to watch a 2-foot putt. You want to see somebody do something you can't do.
Right.
You know, so drum corps is a lot of that. You want to hear, you know, from 24 players and go, oh man, wow.
Yeah.
Except the group before you did that, the group before them did that, the group before them did that, the group before them did that. You know, that's the problem is we as soon as you have the competition part of it and what people think are going to be rewarded, we all start kind of imitating each other and doing the same gags, you know, and believe me, I'm guilty of it, you know, so I want my kids to succeed.
Yeah.
But it's a problem with adjudication in general, you know, like the message being that, okay, you know, it's got to be hard or I can't reward it.
Right.
You know, does it really have to be hard or does it have to be meaningful? You know, did it move you? You know, I had a guy last year early, like this is like first couple of weeks, you know, like, and I got an email and he said, I cried, you know, during the show. You know, I was so moved by it. I looked at the recap and went, they must have cried a lot more for the other two teams ahead of us. So we moved you that much. Like, what is the value of music if we're moving you that much, but you don't see,
But not being
you
rewarded.
have to somehow like quantize it and go, well, but it wasn't very hard. You know, that kind of thing. I still can't wrap my head around that. You know, I'm learning, but
yeah. Well, that reminds me, actually, I wanted to share a brief anecdote. We, at the end of our band camp, we were doing these virtual things and kind of on the fly one day, we decided to do one and make it like a get to know the staff. And so I had my band staff here at Urbana. We went around and asked a bunch of questions, and I asked everybody what their guilty pleasures were, like, you know, musically or whatever. And so I had to admit that I'm a Britney Spears fan, and you know, we're going around and saying different stuff. And so we have a young man on the band staff who aged out of the Blue Devils in 2019, and we got to him, and he said, I'm not even ashamed, but you know, if I had to pick a guilty pleasure, it's Bluecoats 2019.
Oh.
And
that's nice.
That's, you know,
nice.
And he said he wasn't the only.
I thought he was going to say Billie Eilish.
But he said he wasn't the only one there that felt that way. And so that I wanted to ask you a couple of things about that 2019 show, because it was so magical and awesome. And it's, you know, it's a wonder that it took so long for there to just be, in some ways, it seems like, well, why did it take until 2019 to have a great Beatles show? But if you understand music, then you know why, and you know that that's an incredibly daunting thing to do what you were just talking about, which is to make a show that checks the boxes and gives the activity what the activity wants in terms of a drum corps show, but uses the most iconic popular music of all time.
Right.
And so how did that come about? What were your feelings as the guy responsible for that, having to create that?
Well, I'll tell you the genesis of it. First of all, I'm a huge Beatles fan, and I have been since high school, and I know a lot about the Beatles and love their music, obviously. But I hadn't thought about it for so long because up until just recently, it wasn't allowed. We couldn't get the rights for any of the Beatles stuff. You could get the rights, but DCI would have to pay huge sums to all the other arrangers for the same consideration that the Beatles publishing had. So I think back then, and this is going back, it was roughly around the same time when the Bernstein family decided no more Bernstein arrangements. So like within 2 years, we had, okay, well, that's the best, you know, music from the 20th century off the table.
Right.
I guess we're playing Santa and the Clowns next year. You know, it's like, so I hadn't thought about it for a long time. And at the end of 2017, I was in the car with Tom Rarick and Vince Oliver. And Vince was the music coordinator at the time and in charge of all the electronics and everything. Fabulous musician, great guy. And Vince and Tom and I would travel back and forth to the rehearsal site from Indianapolis. And we were kind of lamenting about what I was talking about before, about, okay, we're all starting to sound the same again. You know, what do we do to break, you know, including like we're sounding like we're imitating us, you know. Mm-hmm. And we were a little worried about the perception that we were doing popular music and therefore not being taken as seriously, maybe. And that was probably just us in a bad mood that day.
Sure.
But it was actually Vince in the backseat of the car said, "Have you ever thought about doing a Beatles show?" And I did the full spit take, like into the, and I hadn't thought about it for so long, because I honestly thought it was a no-go. There's no way we could do it. So that was the beginning of it. And we didn't talk about it again until about halfway through the summer in 2018, which was more of a jazz show, the Session 44.
Yeah.
Vince had talked to John a little bit about the Beatles thing, and John started to bother me.
Yeah.
And like when I'm in the middle of one thing, it's like, we'll get to that, kind of thing. But about towards the end of 2018, I thought, oh my gosh, I think John's actually serious about this. Like he's thinking Beatles. So I started just in the back of my mind thinking, okay, how are we going to do this? Like there's a lot of different ways. And I did have old ideas from when we could do it, different scenarios that we could approach it different ways. But it scared me to death. I always compare it to like a nice Sunday afternoon drive in Iraq. You go around a corner, like something bad could happen, like around every single corner. And the big thing is, how do you present the material the way people want to hear it? How do you not out clever yourself, like I talked about before? Because we've all heard those arrangements, right?
Yeah.
Where it just goes too far, and you're like, how do you not make it like those, horrendous, the London Symphony Orchestra presents Whitesnake? Those terrible like Muzak-y orchestrations of Beatles or whoever, Police or whoever. That's like, man, it's loaded with traps. And then the big concern is, how does the percussion participate in a meaningful drum corps way?
Yeah.
That is true to the spirit of the band, the Beatles, but also gets everything we need to do to succeed competitively out there in front of the judges. That was a big concern. It's like, how are we going to find the moments for the percussion? And I know that was obviously a huge concern for Tom. So we had these conversations. We started talking about it, like I said, at our New York meeting on Labor Day, 2019. And even then, I thought, I bet you this doesn't go. I have a feeling this isn't going to go. But I had already plotted out the main, what I thought could be like main moments or events at least, and had a couple ideas for Tom how maybe the percussion could involve themselves in a meaningful drum corps way, kind of thing. So then we get to November at our first camp, and I don't think we read anything in November, but Greg Lagola, the costume designer, showed up, and our set designer, Michael Rayford, showed up with just incredible, like these boards with, 50 uniforms on it. And Michael had a slideshow, all these slides and like potential things. And he's drawing from all these different resources, which I was totally hip to because these are what's in my books, my Beatles books, man, I recognize that. Yeah. We're on the right track here. And I was like, I think we're going to have to do this. That's when it got real for me. When I saw the uniforms, like especially the black and white characters from last year's show, we called them the silhouettes. And they weren't characters necessarily as much as impressions that kind of, walked through sets and stuff or took your eye to a new stage or whatever. That was a huge turning point for me. And I thought, like, we're going to have to do this. Like the production value alone, even if Tom and I screw this up completely, which could happen, then we still have to do it because the production value is just, through the roof. So now from that point, it got serious, and then the meetings got, I didn't want to necessarily reach for the low hanging fruit. I didn't want to play yesterday. I
Right.
didn't want to play Hey Jude. I ended up at the end of the show, at the end of the season, because the audience essentially willed it.
Yeah.
But it was not, definitely not my first choice. I
Sure.
wanted to make sure each Beatle was represented. I wanted there to be a big George movement, in the middle of the show. And I just, I just wanted it to be done respectfully, I guess, and honestly. And it scared me to death, though. Both Tom and we were the last two guys in, I have to tell you,
Yeah.
which is weird because it's such a musically driven show. But we were both like really apprehensive because
It
how
makes
bad
sense.
it can. How bad it can be
Yeah.
when it turns into Muzak. I just thought, oh man, I don't want to be that guy like that.
Right.
It turns people against the Beatles. But I'm really proud of how it turned out, actually, because
Yeah.
everybody, the buy-in, like the body work and the uniforms and the sets, and what was fun about it was like introducing a lot of the members to music that they knew, but they didn't know they knew.
Yeah.
This has been a soundtrack for your life, and some of you don't even know it.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of kids in that situation, that didn't necessarily know the songs or the story. And that was a lot of fun. And, just the buy-in from the kids and man, like that's the first time I've been with a drum corps where they never had a bad night.
Hmm.
Like they were so good last summer. I mean, I went to a rehearsal. We were in Chicago, and I went about a third of the way into the season, and we were still trying to sort out Blackbird because it hadn't really gotten people that we hoped it had. And they hadn't done all the great dance stuff yet to it. We were trying to sort that out, and the kids did a run through, and I halfway through the run through, I kind of came down to the track level, and I was just watching kids, and I had to walk away. The brass guys came up to me, and I was like weeping because just the kids, like the members. I watched the kid that played the Penny Lane solo. Fabulous. Never had a bad night. I'm watching him do his dance stuff, in the George Harrison movement, thinking that kid didn't come here to dance. Like he wants to play his trumpet. And look at him, man. Look at him. And then I'm watching like mellophone players who I stood right beside during that run through that would not be distracted by me, even though they knew I was standing there. It's like, there's not a chance I'm going to look at you, man. They're so focused on just watching the buy-in, and I just, I lost it because I thought, wow, this is like a special group, and sometimes you have that serendipity where the show fits the mood of the group, and I don't know which came first, if the group was already like that or if the show helped transform them, or what it was, but it was a magical, if I never see another drum corps show again in my entire life, the last show they played finals week would be more than enough for me. It's the best thing I've ever seen, and I never say that, believe me. If I hear, General Putman's men warming up in the parking lot, I go, oh my God, they're going to kill us. I'm that guy. I'm the worry wart. Everybody sounds better, but that last night, what they did, well, I'll never forget that as long as I live. So
that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank God you all bought in, because I think it's certainly become one of my favorites, and I think it's going to be a legendary program for many years because it moved a lot of people. And, everybody I know that saw it was just over the moon, excited about it. And we were, I remember seeing it for the first time at whatever show it was on the East Coast, and just thinking, man, how did they do that? All these themes that we know that, grew up around this music. And so, yeah, thanks. Great job.
Thanks so much. Well, you mentioned all those themes that we know, that was a concern of mine originally. And then, it was Dean Westman, who's our program coordinator, that reminded me, you know what, like that tune means something to you, but it means something entirely different to this guy. And he knows it. And he's going to relive that you know, the familiarity was like an issue with me. I was like, people are going to take us seriously, you know. And then I thought, no, we're tapping into people's, even their subconscious memory. You know, they don't even know that they've heard this stuff, and maybe they were in a situation where that song was playing, and you know, it'll bring back that memory for them. I hope, you know, that's what you hope for. It's like you touch people that way, you know, and you know, the way John and Jim and Michael and Greg presented it, you know, it's like from the moment they walked out, you went, well, this is different. You know, this is, I need to watch this, you know, I need to listen to this. And let's face it, we couldn't have done that show in helmets, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the visual thing was so striking. And I'm sure there were many things that I didn't catch in that, but I remember thinking the first time that I saw you guys that year, it reminded me of being at a Paul McCartney concert, because I took my mom to see Paul McCartney for her birthday in like 2002, maybe. And he came through DC, and incredible 2 hour, 45-minute show, no opener, just Paul McCartney played all the hits, played a few things from the new album. But what was so striking is they had this like 10-minute introduction and the house lights came down, and then these spotlights came on, and there were all these characters from different eras of the Beatles, like from the album covers and the umbrellas and the apple and like all these different things just sort of floating through the audience in different places. And you just felt like you were a part of that greater body of work, you know, the generations of that music. And how cool to bring that to pageantry and provide some of that same stuff through the costuming and that great intro. And my other question about 2019 had to do with that little Easter egg with the counting. I heard you talk about before. I was wondering if you could explain that and tell us if there were any other little Easter eggs in that show.
Not quite as buried as that one. And that one was just part of what we call the cacophony from A Day in the Life. The famous orchestral, what George Martin referred to it as an orgasm of sound, you know, at the end of it. They didn't have that, obviously, when they were doing their rhythm tracks in the studio. So they had their roadie, Mal Evans, who was their buddy from when they were growing up. He used to drive the van to gigs and load all their gear. He just counted the bars, like 1, 2, 3, 4, you know. And if you really listen on the CDs, I never ever noticed it on vinyl, but if you listen on the CDs, you can hear him counting. And at the end of it, he has the alarm clock go off. Woke up, fell out of bed, dragged the coat, right?
Yeah.
So I always assumed the alarm clock was part of, you know, woke up, fell out of bed. But yeah, it was, that was her roadie. So I thought, we have this beautiful guy that does all of our, takes care of all the sets. And I mean, this guy works his butt off, you know, make sure all the paint is done, you know, painted chairs. His name is John Millsap. Beautiful kid. And he marched drum corps, and he came to us, and he's taken over this responsibility. And you can imagine the Bluecoats.
It's a big job.
Yeah, that's a big job, because there's a lot of stuff out there. And I said to, I think, Matt Jordan, why don't let's during the cacophony, our version of the cacophony, no one's going to hear it, but let's have John just count, you know, let's have him do it, because I want to include him. Like he'll get to be in a Bluecoats drum corps show, you know. So we put that in there, and you can't hear it. It's a little almost too loud in our version.
That's cool.
Because people liked it, but that's why we did that, just as kind of a tribute to our roadie, you know.
Yeah.
In terms of Easter eggs, the only other things, I mean, just about every counter melody in the show is derived from a Beatles melody. You know, I was doing my own thing, and I thought, what am I doing? Like, I have this huge resource here. Like, my favorite one is at the beginning when you hear the vocalist sing, "I Want to Hold Your Hand." towards the end of that, underneath that, you hear Yesterday and the little brass. And that it serves as a background for the vocalist. And it just, I mean, pure luck.
Yeah.
It just happened to kind of work, and fit underneath the harmony. And that one I really liked, because it was cool. Like, especially in the intro of the show, we wanted to get the whole hold your hand idea was a big idea in the show, that we were all going to come together somehow, but just the idea of the word yesterday, we're also looking back at a great musical body, and one of the best tunes ever written, so I figured out how to include that without playing it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because I never wanted to play that tune. I thought that would be, a little too obvious. But yeah, there's a lot of little nuggets in there, like musical quotes. You hear "Here Comes the Sun" right towards the end of the George Harrison movement. Only one. Well, we do the mixed meter, bo-do-dee, 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 bo-do-bo, all that stuff, just because that really, for me, that just fueled percussion. This is something Tom could really work with, and we could make something up. But part of the painting on the stages included the Yellow Submarine sun coming up. And so that yellow appeared towards the end of the George Harrison movement. So we thought, well, let's, here comes the sun. Let's throw it in there. Why not? That's cool. So because of the Beatles licensing, you can't include any other Beatles tunes with George Harrison. You're not allowed to combine a Paul tune with a George tune.
Wow. You're
not allowed to combine any other Beatle tune with George. If you want to, you could combine, Hank Snow. You could do a medley of Hank Snow and George Harrison, but you can't do Paul McCartney and George Harrison. Which crazy. Is very bizarre. And I think weird. Personally, I think it's just a way for the family to make people realize that his body of work, like just to distinguish it as its own, work. I don't think there's any malice involved.
Sure.
But so that, in a way, like there was things that we wanted to combine, or I wanted to combine. I always thought Golden Slumbers and Here Comes the Sun would be a great pairing. You could do a lot with that visually, the sun and night and blah, blah, blah. It's kind of obvious, but you're not allowed to do that. So we had to make the George Harrison movement of the show really its own entity, Yeah. So
that's great.
Yep.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I wanted to kind of wrap up by asking how you and the Bluecoats are dealing with the COVID thing, and what advice you might have to high school students right now that are dealing with the loss of a band season and trying to stay engaged.
Well, obviously the loss of a band season. I mean, my oldest daughter is going to university now. She lost her senior year. No prom, no final concert, no Rose at the final concert, which she was really looking forward to. And it's a tough one. My only advice to her was that everybody's losing something. This is like one of the few times in the history of the world that we're literally all in it together. And everybody's losing something from, a prom seems like really inconsequential compared to a life, or losing a grandparent or a parent. And so you have to roll with it, obviously, your first priority is to stay healthy and, keep your distance and wear your mask and do what you can do as a courtesy to other people to make them feel safe. In terms of, the musical thing, I mean, obviously we have to keep our distance. I wrote for a lot of groups this year that just didn't happen. Like they have nothing, which is awful. But a lot of them are doing the pep band thing, like 6 feet apart in the stands. So they're finding a way to play,
Yeah.
And, we, as instrumentalists, we love to play. We play our instruments, but let's face it, we want to play with other people. So that's the hard part is, when like, it's just the time lost. We have students, Bluecoat students at North Texas, that have lost, 2/3 of their playing experience with other people, which is horrible. We have to wait it out. As far as the Bluecoats go, we probably won't see each other as a group. Like I know I won't see my partners until April,
Mm-hmm.
if then, because I live in Canada. So if I go down there, when I come home, I have to self-isolate for 2 weeks. So, and if I do it at home, that means my daughters have to self-isolate for 2 weeks, so they can't go to school. So I would have to literally do it. I'd have to do it by myself, or my children would be affected. So we have tried to. We've had projects that all the members can be involved in, like doing these. You've seen all the Zoom recordings with.
Yeah.
That's getting a bit old, isn't it? We've done all that, and we're trying to. We just started a kind of a school that Mike Scott has been working on, the Bluecoats Winter Virtual School, where we're going to have different presenters and different people come in and speak to the students. We have many of the instructors doing online lessons and sessions with the members, the students. Right now we're planning on having a 2021 show. None of us have any idea what's going to happen, but you got to move on, man. I mean, this is a new normal, so we feel like we have to move on and keep making music. And one thing I'm really proud of that the Bluecoats actually do is we have a squad of people that does wellness checks with our members. So they'll phone them, because many of these young people didn't just lose their drum corps season. They may have also lost their WGI season, or their senior year, or their last year of university, or, heaven forbid, a relative, along the way. So we have a team of people that keeps in touch with the students that are less than, that don't necessarily stay involved online. And, I personally had a hard time staying involved online with, we would have Zoom wine just to get in touch with each other. And for me, that didn't work. It just made it worse. It kind of bummed me out. And I had to find other ways to stay in touch. So I just send gag gifts to the other guys now.
That's good.
So I mean, I think the Bluecoats are coping with it really pretty well. And I have to say, our CFO, Genevieve Geisler, she did her master's in public health. So she knew this was coming in February. And she warned us, there's a really good chance that this thing could get out of control, depending on, leadership and everything. And there's a good chance we won't have a DCI season. And this is at a design meeting, by the way. So, I mean, and I was like, oh no, come on, no. Stuff like that doesn't happen to us, right? So they were really ready. They had a whole bunch of different scenarios. They knew their bingo would be lost. They knew they would have to reimburse a lot of ticket holders because the Bluecoats run 3 DCI shows in the summer. Mm-hmm. All that money had to be given back, or if you could talk someone into donating it, students that, could have marched this year, but probably won't be able to march next year. They had to be reimbursed. So that took up most of March and April, taking care of business, and, so we were fortunate. They kind of had to jump on it a little bit, and right away, the first priority was, you can imagine the Zoom call when we had to tell the children there wasn't going to be a season. It's brutal. Like some kids have auditioned, 3 years in a row and not made it, and finally made it, and this is their shot. And but like I said to my daughter, everybody has lost something, and we're all in this together, and we have to remember that. And be courteous and kind to each other and wait it out, you know, and do what we can. If you're not part of the solution, which we can't be other than taking care of our own physical health and being courteous to other people, then you're probably part of the problem. So, you know, my only advice is keep your chin up and keep practicing, man. This is a good opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
To get good on your horn, you know, to practice. And if you need to seek solace, there's no better place than music.
Yeah.
And family.
Awesome. Well, Doug, thank you so much for being here. This has been really great. We're going to have a lot more of these. We'd love to have you back sometime. And we really appreciate the advice. So to everyone out there in MMBA land, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you back here next Wednesday.